G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and so far you're having a fantastic weekend as well, spending some time for yourself, for your friends and your family. I really do hope that you are doing really well, no matter where you are. So legends, today as always we do have a lot to talk about. I need to show you the maps, I need to show you where things are moving, but something that's becoming more and more relevant is where the fortifications are sitting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where the front line is moving, where Russia is pushing, and where those Ukrainian fortifications sit. And we'll break that down over a couple of minutes. You know, I like to waffle. I want to talk about some changes in command and some Ukrainian strikes in Crimea as well. Also, the big news of the day, well, it should be the big news of the day regarding Russia-Ukraine war, is that Zelensky has hinted for the first time at an end to the hot war and some level of concession made. But it's not that simple. But like I have been saying, basically for the last, say, 4 to 6 months, the messaging coming out of Kyiv from officials has been changing. It's been like drip feeding in this idea of some level of end to the war that's outside of those set goals. So we'll talk about exactly what he has said, and of course, you're on YouTube, so I'll give my 2 cents for what it is worth. But something I do want to say just in the beginning here, as we report on Ukraine-Russia war, but a lot of people have jumped on then the Syria, then Assad and rebels as well, and have taken how they feel about Ukraine-Russia and applied it to that side. And I just want to talk about this for a second, as I think this is dangerous. So Syria is again under massive escalation of armed offensives. And like I said, both pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian pages have jumped on one side here, one way or the other, to support their side, of the idea, I guess, of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, unlike most people here, I have actually had the privilege to actually go to Syria, and I'll show you some photographs here. And I found there exactly what I've found in every other corner of the globe I've gone to. 99% of people are lovely, they'll do anything for you, and they just want to live in peace and have the opportunity to do that, to have an education, to have a family and procreate. But in this war, both sides here are being used as proxies for superpowers. These, whether Assad, whether the rebels, elements within this use extremist ideology, tactics, and savage oppression. And this pushes millions of innocents into abject poverty. And then this poverty, this then is a sure way to radicalise and steal the futures of young boys to then fight for your cause. And what I will add to this is one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And the hypocrisy I see around this is truly stunning. If you're wondering who the good and who the bad guy is, it's a lot less simple than this. I spent time in 2023 in Idlib following the devastating earthquake in the rebel-held areas. And my heart goes out to the children all over Syria, all over all of these countries at war. Those innocent, smiling children who just exist on the sides of war. What I will say in this is that we are in the second Cold War. Some will claim the Third World War, but I'll say second Cold War. And just like the first Cold War, there will be fights between major powers, but through third-party countries used as proxies. And of course, what it does to the civilians there, typically in very poor countries, is horrific. And this isn't uncommon. It is quite common for a peer-to-peer country to fall into a stalemate war and move into some level of proxy war. So I want to talk about this a bit. Now, there's a couple of books here. So Planning for Protraction, you know how much I like this. He does talk about this. So let's just break this part of it down. So, proxy wars. Throughout history, whenever a protracted conflict has reached something of an operational stalemate or proved too onerous to maintain, it has frequently been channeled or redirected towards secondary theatres in the form of confrontation by proxy. So of course we know the Russians on Assad, and there's been some indication, I wouldn't say any rock solid evidence though, of in Ukrainian special operations training in Syria as well on the rebel side. There's been a lot of training on that side from a lot of countries. And this is exactly like we've seen in some African countries as well. If both parties' main bodies of military forces are already deployed within the primary zone of peer-to-peer conflict, it can be more cost-effective to employ proxies or surrogates in the more remote peripheral theatre of operations. Now, I'm not saying this is exactly what it is, but I do believe this war in the level that we are seeing of real protracted war, attritional conflict, we will see probably an end to this war. This is going to go into what Zelensky has said today, but I believe we will see then a lot of proxy wars. And I believe over the next decade, if we don't see a peer-to-peer war, America v China, West v China, whatever, we will see a hell of a lot of other proxies kick up. Now, of course, the rebels backed by Turkey, some Israeli influence, there's a hell of a lot of Western influence, and then the Assad is backed by Russia and others as well. So this is very difficult. But Weeb Union put something very interesting that I've been wanting to make a video on actually, but I just haven't found the time. He talks about drones here and what is happening in Aleppo. But he goes, the world we live in today is not the world of 1814 or 2011. It's a world where anyone can fight against a conventional army as long as you are organised and disciplined. Drones have revolutionised warfare. Anyone who doesn't adapt will suffer the consequences. And this reminds me of the book, I've lost my sticky note, but it reminds me of the book Freedom by Sebastian Junger. And what my sticky note on the front of this said was the initial Russian invasion truly highly incompetent, or did we really underestimate the power of drones? And I believe it's a bit of column A and a bit of column B. But in the book Freedom, Sebastian Junger does talk about small forces who are organised, the ability to defeat conventional, much larger militaries, and gives a lot of historical evidence of this as well. But drones have definitely revolutionised this. I've quite often said that if we went back into Afghanistan, the losses for the coalition would be absolutely massive with drone warfare. The problem with this is they have somewhat levelled the battlefield. So if there is a war to then take out an oppressive regime, it's going to be incredibly difficult to do. So that's just my piece on Syria. The people there are lovely, and you've got two opposing sides who use the tool of terrorism, oppression to their advantage. And I see so much hypocrisy and people willing to turn a blind eye on this because, well, X has said this about, quote, my side, your side, who most people are not willing to actually go and fight for. Anyway, let's start here then. Actually, no, we're not going to start on the maps. I want to start, the wrong folder again. I want to start and talk about strikes and command. So, Ukraine has appointed a new commander of ground forces, Major General Mikhailo Drapati. Now, Tataragami UA says, good news. Drapati is known for his organisation skills, shown most recently when he stopped a Russian offensive in Kharkiv direction after being assigned there following a breakthrough. So there's been a replacement of the ground forces commander. From what we're seeing on the ground, I think this is probably a good thing because things are not going very well. Now, this is still difficult to know exactly what is hit here, but in Vatino, Crimea, as an air defence system has been then destroyed, you can sort of tell by the classic cook-off we see here. Now, this was a Ukrainian strike down into Crimea. People are claiming it is an S-400. I can't tell you what it is from that image. We will wait and see. Typically, well, we always do. Within a day or two, we find out what has been hit. Now, the Defence of Ukraine official account has said for the first time, Russian daily personnel losses exceed over 2,000 soldiers. We make the occupiers pay the highest price for their terror. Again, these are the numbers being used, but I have said that, look, it's impossible to even get these numbers anyway. That number is of KIA, where that doesn't line up to other Western agencies who are saying that number or close to that number is including KIA wounded, missing in action, absolutely everything. Again, with those numbers, I don't take them really into account because it's just impossible if you have a missile fire 200 kilometres hit a bunker to say, yeah, there was 15 dudes in there. Yeah. But one thing I will say on that, and the reason I bring that up, is I gave the other day in a video the reasons why I may see a huge increase in propaganda. I do believe things like that massive increase in figures may have happened, but we are seeing Russia move across the border. So the counter to this is, well, we'll release these huge figures of the amount that is being lost. And I have no doubt that Russia would do the same thing. If Ukraine was making 30, 40 square kilometres a day, Russia today gained 39 square kilometres. I have no doubt that we'd see the Russian ministry pop up and go, yeah, but we are liquidating 2,000 people a day. All I'm saying is it's more difficult than this. So let's jump onto the maps here. So of course we have Ukraine in the centre of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupies 22, purple since 14. The red check, of course, which is ground that has been occupied by Russia within the past 24 hours. And you can see there is a significant amount of red check on this map today, particularly out from Veshneve, Seledov towards then Shevchenko and Pokrovsk. You can see this being made, Zavote coming under control, and a lot of Pushkini as well. So let's focus on just this direction for now. I have a specific folder on this. Now, General Syrsky, who he's not the one being replaced, that he's the commander of all forces. We were talking about ground forces before, but he has spoken about that he's going to have a deployment of more reserves onto these fronts. Based on results of work, all necessary decisions were made to strengthen the units in reserves, additional ammunition, weapons and military equipment. Encourage defenders to break the enemy's plans, which go beyond the boundaries of those directions. So continue to hold back the enemy here and talk about deployment of more reserves. I wonder where they are coming from. We know there is a manpower shortage all over the front line for Ukraine. May they be coming from Kursk? I do believe it is highly likely we will see the abandonment of Kursk before winter or into winter. That said, the thing that holds me back, while I say highly likely, not that it's going to happen, is I don't know if Ukraine can actually pull out of Kursk without Russia crossing into Sumy. So let's have a look at how these maps are then lining up. Pokrovsk front, Russian army made advances toward Lysivki inside of Zvote, so this area up in here. Look, to be fair, these are showing fairly similar. This red dot, this is this Pushkini as well. And we have the second update of Syriac as well, showing that Zvote has come under full control of the Russians. But it's actually funny because this is showing, to my eye, less control on Syriacs to Pushkini than Deep State is, at least to some degree. But like I said in the beginning, what I'm interested in here is the fortifications and where Russia is trying to go. And I've shown you the fortifications here multiple times. Now, what I need to do is not delete this, but let's have a zoom in. And we can see Solone, Shevchenko, Zavote. This is the area we are talking about. And you can see where these defensive works sit around Pokrovsk, where Russia is looking like they are trying to bypass them through this area. And I came across this today from Play FA0 with a line through it. Critical situation, Pokrovsk, Shevchenko under serious threat. As the Russians continue exploiting the Zavote Gap, so that Zavote that come under control, he's calling the Zavote Gap, in the Ukrainian lines, the vital town of Shevchenko and the Solony River may seem increasingly in reach of the Russians. Let's analyse the situation. So to give you an idea, this is then Veshneve, Seledov front, this is Pokrovsk, and this is that Zvote Gap pushing through. You can see the defensive works like I showed you on John Helen's map here. Make sure you go and follow him as well. So we come to number 2 for him. After Seledov's fall, which is where we showed you Seledov, the Russians have seemingly found a weak spot in the Ukrainian lines behind the city, advancing much more easily and consistently after capturing Veshneve, Petrivka and Horovka. They are now fighting for Zvote and now at the Shevchenko's doorstep. As of today, that Zvote, that has come then under control, what creates an issue for then Shevchenko. So let's zoom in here. Zvote, Shevchenko, this is a concern through these lines on this Zvote Gap, as he has coined the term. Zooming into Shevchenko, we can assume the main route of attack along the railway. It's much easier to attack along the railway than across, and a supporting attack west of this pond, just south of Shevchenko itself, so up the railway, which is what we have seen. This is from Seledov. When we were back in Ukrainsk, what we were saying this, is Ukraine cannot allow Russia to get onto this railway line. We talked about this months ago. Russia got to that railway line, Seladov fell very quickly. And what have they done since? Well, you can see the amount of ground made just to the southwest of Seladov. They've moved up this railway to Zvote. So what he is saying here is they're going to continue moving up the railway and attack Shevchenko and up. To prevent this, the Ukrainians have dug an anti-tank ditch in early September. A question why this stuff wasn't there a long time ago. Crossing the railway, ending at the pond's eastern side and restarting west of it, then going south. Moreover, small trench systems were dug behind the river and on the hill near the lake. So this is one area where the Russians may go, but they are going to hit anti-tank ditches. They are still going to hit major fortifications. But like I showed you yesterday, that major fortification, one of the best ones I've seen, realistically being taken with very little resistance. And I think a lot of that comes down to manpower. Obviously, Russian attacks are going to be funneled by bridges over the swampy terrain. So you've got to cross a bridge, you funnel in, although we're assuming that these bridges are still crossable, making Russian advancements here more challenging. These funnels, however, will only help if the retreat behind Solana will be organised, leaving no cracks in the defensive line. So you're only really going to get one hit on these then bridges that will funnel in here. If the retreatment out of these areas isn't controlled and there's gaps in it, Russia will be able to flank around it or just push through it, and it's not going to be as effective. In conclusion, I was indeed right in my late summer of Novhorovka thread when I said that the south flank of Pokrovsk was the most vulnerable. After Shevchenko is an unfinished anti-tank ditch immediately after Pokrovsk and one of its suburbs. So there's still some areas in here. Don't get me wrong, Pokrovsk and its suburbs will be a tough nut to crack with their high-rise and scattered telecons and industrial zones. But the Ukrainians have to do everything possible not to let the Russians reach the city. And this is one of the last occasions. Again, this is exactly what we said sort of about Seladov, that it needed to be stopped before the Russians got in, and then it fell very quickly. That everything needs to be done to stop the Russians getting across some of this swampy terrain and an organised withdrawal up through Shevchenko. If the Russians get to Pokrovsk, it's still going to be unbelievably tough. There's going to be very large losses, but you should try and delay them before. I've seen many people go, should Ukraine be really forcing up like 10Ks, 15Ks behind everywhere on the front line, massive defensive works, and have like one mass withdrawal back to these lines, because like we've seen, there's still defensive lines getting dug in around these areas of Pokrovsk, and those excavators, well, you're just in an excavator, that's what the council uses, is incredibly vulnerable to, say, an FPV drone. Thanks a lot for reading. Above all, letting me reach 3,000 subscriber mark. Believe me, it's an early Christmas gift for me. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. I believe everyone who is still at this point in the video, go and chuck him a follow if you're on Twitter or X. Does a fantastic write-up that I have semi-stolen. But thank you very much as well. So let's just move just to the south of here, and we have Kursk, more red through here. Again, I believe this red's about a week old. We did see geolocated footage of Russian soldiers in that direction. Let's look at what Surak is showing. They say he doesn't have anything showing the center of Kursk, but Beretsky more pushing all the way out to about where my cursor is at the moment. Now, what is going to be interesting is, say the Russians, let's just say Syriac is correct, the Russians are out to here. This bridge, starting to knee, was taken down. If we see the Russians conduct a successful flanker through here, it'll be interesting to see how flooded this was. If they get stuck, if they can only get to here and can't move across, then we have our confirmation on who exactly had a demolition on that bridge. But if it's successful for the Russians, well, we'll get an idea maybe the other way. So let's keep pushing down, and we see in Ilinka this grey zone filling in. That's not surprising, as well as around Tredove, it is squeezing down on this area too. I believe we will see fairly soon a complete withdrawal out of this salient that has formed, that only has a 3 kilometre gap but is fairly deep. So let's go from here to here, say 7.5 kilometres deep. Now we'll keep pushing just to the west of here, and then we have Velika Novosilivka. Now, of course, you can see straight away a lot of ground being made in here by the Russian forces, particularly around Rozdolny and to the east of Makarivka as well, flanking this whole area where the 2023 counteroffensive was. Remember, this seems like a fever dream that we were back in Vuhledar, and we then saw Pavlivkia, and we remember Zolota Niva. This is all very soon. This whole section through here is recent. It's unbelievable to see how much the fall of Vuhledar has affected the rest of this. Anyone who says that was not strategically important, unfucking subscribe. It very much was, as the map has proven. Now, let's have a bit of a look-see here. So we have this geolocation right in the center of Rozdolny, showing then Russian Marines in here taken this area. Let me just have a quick look at some of the gear. It's not good enough quality to tell, but these guys are fairly well kitted out, looking from what we see in other areas of the front compared to here. Then Velika Novosibirsk, Rozdolny, you can see that Noel Reports here is catching up on a few different reports, Rozdolny, but is showing nowhere near as close as even Deep State does. Remember, Deep State is showing movement into the very outskirts of Velika Novosibirsk. Then we come to Syriac maps. Now, this is the first one of the day. A bit of movement just to the northeast of Velika Novosibirsk, moving up, but a lot of movement out further. If we take where this road runs in here, showing the movement that we saw yesterday on the Deep State map. So now confirming this. Remember, there is a threat to this road and this road here of supply and control all down into here. The Russians are fairly close to this road running through Rivnapil and close to both of these roads, what then creates a nightmare situation for everything and logistics down in this sector, and maybe a complete withdrawal out of where there was a lot of bloodshed in the 23 counteroffensive. Furthermore, come up onto Syriac map here. Now you can see Rozdolny up in here, slight advancement, saying the Russians have taken full control, and down in this sector here, very similar to Deep State, showing a Russian movement on that direction. Now, let's zoom out a little bit more, come down into then Toretsk area. We have one update in here by Syriac showing just down in this area has come under Russian control. Somewhat similar to what we've seen Deep State over the past few days, but not as much. Let's see if there's any grey zone shift in here. No either. So nothing up in the east, northeast of the country. Then we come into Kursk. Now, no changes on this map either, but let's come and look at the Syriac map. So the best way is just to line up where some of these roads sit, as it is difficult to see. So we can see where this turns out to the north. So he's saying in this area here, see these reservoirs, it is this area right in here towards Sverdlikovo that is coming under Russian control. Then we come to the other side and we have Martinyovka. Again, look at where this road has that large sweeping bend, that this area coming back under control. Remember, there was some fluidity on this exactly out of Martinyovka the other day that actually showed Ukrainian forces outside of even the grey zone on the Ukrainian Deep State map. But that was the end of our mapping for today. Now, what I spoke about was that there has been a hell of a lot of different messaging over the past months coming from Kyiv around maybe an end to the war, maybe some negotiations, X, Y, and Z. And what I'll say to this, if the collapse of the Russian forces, the Russian economy, was imminent like we have been told for years now, this wouldn't be being suggested regardless of Biden or Trump. Now, I'm not sure if it's too early to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I may be getting an expert on economics, particularly in this part of the world, on the podcast to actually, because I've said, look, I'm not qualified to speak on the economy. I'm a military guy myself. That's my interest. I can do little bits and pieces. I can look at some graphs, but to truly talk about the ins and outs. And I've had someone incredibly qualified reach out. So hopefully I can make that happen. If I don't, ignore me. I apologise. So this is from Sky News. Zelensky suggests hot phase of Ukraine war could end in return for NATO membership if offered, even if seized land isn't returned immediately. With their chief foreign correspondent, membership could be offered to unoccupied parts of the country in order to end the hot phase of the war. So what Ukraine controls becomes NATO. The rest, then there is some diplomatic swap back in here. We're going to get to it, don't worry. As long as the NATO invitation itself recognises Ukraine's internationally recognised borders. So that the NATO membership recognises all the borders. The NATO security guarantees are in the Ukrainian controlled parts, and then there's the Russian occupied parts. But one thing I will say in this, we've talked about this before, Russia's number one constant in this war has been wanting to prevent Ukraine achieving NATO membership. I don't care about other goals and territory and whatever, that's been their number one goal that has been consistent the entire way, has been not wanting Ukraine in NATO. And I even believe that Russia would trade some of the land that they are occupying to make sure that doesn't happen. And what I say here is that this phase in the war, to end the hot phase, this is not dictated by Zelensky. It's currently dictated by Putin. That Putin has the upper hand on the battlefield at the moment in the aspects that are really, really important. Troops, arty, air, and naval power as well. So this is, even if Ukraine says, look, we're ready for it, it still needs to bring Putin to the table. Now, there are things you can do to sort of push that along coming to the table, such as longer strikes, whatever position of power we keep hearing. But if it's in the next 6 to 8 weeks, it's still going to be somewhat dictated by what. Like, you still need to bring Putin to the table to do this, to stop the war. It can't just be all one side, especially if one side has an upper hand or not. Volodymyr Zelensky has suggested a ceasefire deal could be struck if Ukrainian territory he controls taken under the NATO umbrella, allowing him to negotiate the return of the rest in a diplomatic way. Now, my question here is, how is this going to be taken back diplomatically? Russia has fought and lost unbelievably amounts of men, equipment, weapons, whatever, to gain this amount of territory. Okay? There is an end to the hot war. Ukraine joins NATO, which is exactly the one thing which is consistent that Russia doesn't want. What then is going to happen to make Russia withdraw out of all of these areas, especially if it is now internationally, or continue to be internationally recognised regardless of that NATO membership or not? I don't know what would have to be offered up, or how much pressure have to be put on for that to occur. I don't know how diplomatically that can work. Mr. Zelensky said NATO membership would have to be offered to unoccupied parts of the country to end the hot phase. He appeared to accept occupied eastern parts of the country would fall outside of such a deal for the time being. But again, like we said up here, the rest will come back under NATO once swapped diplomatically. That said, even in my wildest dreams, if Ukraine doesn't have military success pushing through these areas, especially Crimea, if it isn't a military push through and a defeated Russia, I can't see any way of that coming back under control, especially Crimea. Other areas are slightly different. Saying if we want to stop the hot phase of the war, we need to take under the NATO umbrella of the territory of Ukraine that we have under our control, about that 80%. We need to do it fast. And then, on the occupied territory of Ukraine, Ukraine can get them back in a diplomatic way. Zelensky said a ceasefire was needed to guarantee that Russian President Vladimir Putin will not come back. He said NATO should immediately cover the part of Ukraine that remains under Kyiv's control. The problem is that could enact Article 5. No one wants especially the incoming American administration, does not want to step into a wider, escalated war of many different countries being involved. But the problem here is that what is being suggested offers no guarantee that there won't be further military action to recover that land if diplomatic talks fail. What I'm talking about is a guarantee to Russia. This is where this gets hard, and people don't want to talk about this. Is, okay, if the hot phase of the war is ended, Ukraine then joins NATO. Okay? And this is Russia over here, by the way. If Putin has this paranoia that NATO is going to push onto Russia at some point, what is the guarantee for him that if and when diplomatic talks fail to return this area here under diplomatic discussions, what is going to be the guarantee for Russia if that doesn't happen, that there won't be then a second war? Now, Ukraine will say the opposite. They will say, well, if we don't have NATO, what is stopping Russia from pushing back? Which I agree with. But it's the other way too, isn't going to have to be at least put on the table if you want to bring Putin to that exact table. This is why I call this the impossible diplomacy. I've said this term multiple times of this war at the moment, that it requires military victories, and we hear more and more and more Zelensky and all these leaders talk about Ukraine in a position of power. Okay, if Ukraine wants to go to the negotiating table, a position of power, things need to change dramatically of what is actually occurring on that line at the moment. I think, and this is maybe conspiratorial, is if, and I don't think it was, I forgot who it was talked about this, it might have been Tatarigami Ue, but that if Zelensky has some end to this war that doesn't include territories, that is political suicide. That said, if that diplomacy fails, there may be a shift of blame going, well, we would have if this, but we had to, our hands were tied, therefore it's not, to try and save that senior officials and command's sort of arse as well. We have to work with the new president, talking about Trump. Zelensky saying, I want to work with him directly because there are different voices from people around him, probably like Elon Musk. And that's why we need to allow anybody around to destroy our communication. So you can't allow anyone around Trump who could then destroy the communication. It will be not helpful and will be destructive. We have to try and find the new model. I want to share with him ideas and I want to hear from him, and they had a constructive and good meeting together. Of course, Trump and Zelensky. Let's continue here. It's the first time Zelensky has hinted at a ceasefire that could include Russian control of Ukrainian territory. Throughout the conflict, Zelensky has never said that he would cede any occupied Ukrainian territory to Russia. If this happens, if there is a land given to Russia for a ceasefire, regardless of if there is a promise of diplomatic bringing it back or whatever, I think there will be internal issues in Ukraine, especially from those groups and those men on the front line who have sacrificed so much for this not to come under control. The other issue is going to be a lot of people saying that will return to Ukraine is on the condition that their home or the occupied land is returned under Ukraine. So it's going to be a problem getting people back as well. He said such a move is not allowed under the Ukrainian constitution. Dmitry Kuleba, the ex-foreign minister, has also spoken about this. The furthest he has gone previously was an interview with Le Monde, a French paper, in July this year. He suggested the territories could join Russia if they voted in a free and fair referendum. But he said Kyiv would have to take the territory back under its control in order to hold such a vote. So Kyiv would have to hold that. Then these regions would have like a vote of autonomy under chapters. Don't worry, the chapters in the UN Charter. I've said it before, I can't remember the chapters exactly, for autonomous regions. I think that is probably what Trump is going to go for, is these occupied regions that are occupied. If a diplomatic end here is going to be, we need to run a fair referendum here for these regions to become autonomous. Whether that border moves or not, that's the part of the UN Charter that they themselves say isn't very clear, is if there's an autonomous region. Okay, let's say there's a vote and Donetsk becomes an autonomous region under the UN Charter article, I think it's 68. Does that remain autonomous but within Ukraine's borders? Does it become autonomous just completely, or is it autonomous under then a Russian border? That's the hard bit in reading into those laws for autonomy. Around a fifth of Ukrainian territory remains under Russian control, so about 20%-ish. But with Russia's advancements recently, I do believe Putin would ask for more territory, the remainder of the oblasts that he doesn't occupy, those 4 oblasts and Crimea, before coming to the table. Earlier this year, Zelensky presented the victory plan to the Ukrainian parliament, which includes a refusal to cede Ukrainian territory and sovereignty. However, Moscow suggested that it will not give up any of its land its forces occupy in any peace deal, and argued Kyiv ceding its territory is a precursor for when it comes to the negotiating table. We've seen what Putin has put forward as his peace deal as well. Despite Ukraine's staunch defence and its territory and attempted counterattack since the war began more than 1,000 days ago, Kyiv's forces have been on the back foot in recent months, and Russia has slowly made gains in the east of the country. At this point in time, it's not the best time for Ukraine to come to the negotiating table. It may be needed, but if Ukraine's only going to come to a position of strength, Ukraine at the moment is not in a position of strength, unless, like everyone says, that the Russian economy and military forces are about to have an imminent collapse. And of course, if you look at if you are drinking the Kool-Aid of those 2,000 losses a day, you'll say, how couldn't this be? Anyway, we don't have a crystal ball, and we will see it unfold as we go. And hopefully the bloodshed just stops. At this point in time, if you ask me my actual feelings about this war, since it's moved into a protracted attritional phase, I just want the killing to stop. Whether that makes me one way or the other, I just want the killing to stop and people to return to their fucking homes and work shit out after that. But I just don't know how that's going to ever occur. And it's easy for me to sit here and say that. It's very easy for us to sit on Twitter and judge someone for joining Al-Qaeda, judge someone for joining this. And something became very relevant to me from my time in Afghanistan was if I was a young lad born in that village and then these Aussie blokes rocked up 15,000 kilometres from their home, I'd probably be in that as well. It's not justifying anything, but it's saying that it's very easy for us to sit in wealthy Western countries like Australia, me here with my suit and tie on, and criticise or make assumptions, whatever, and I'm not there. I'm not a Ukrainian on the front line fighting back for his territory, nor am I a Russian who's been called up to go and fight either, nor am I in Syria on one side or the other. I'm merely showing you what I see and sharing how I feel about certain aspects. Legends, you have a fantastic weekend. Look after yourself, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.